When an avoidant calls you too strong, what they often really mean is, your self-respect exposes where I haven't grown yet, because your strength doesn't actually hurt them. It confronts them, and that confrontation is deeply uncomfortable for someone whose whole nervous system is organized around avoiding emotional responsibility. Think about what your strength really looks like in this dynamic. It's not that you never feel pain or never doubt yourself. It's that even through the confusion and heartbreak, you still have a core that says, I deserve respect, consistency, and clarity. You might wobble, you might question yourself, but you keep coming back to that inner standard, and every time you do, it shines a light on the gap between what a healthy partner would do and what they are doing. And that gap is exactly where their shame lies. So instead of saying, I feel inadequate next to your boundaries, they flip it into, you're too demanding, too intense, too strong, you don't need anyone. Because if they can label your self-respect as a problem, they don't have to look at their own lack of growth. Your ability to hold a boundary, to say, this doesn't work for me, to step back when you're being disrespected, highlights the places where they still choose avoidance over courage, where they still disappear instead of communicating, where they still expect closeness without accountability, and that makes them feel small, not because you are making them feel small, but because their behavior shrinks in comparison to the standard you embody. They may even admire your strength in private while resenting it in practice because it means they can't coast. They can't just offer the bare minimum and have you gratefully accept it forever. Your strength asks a silent question every time they pull away or dodge responsibility. Is this really the best you can do? And rather than face that question honestly, it's easier for them to frame you as too much or too strong. That way, they get to stay exactly where they are without examining why they can't or won't rise. When you say, I won't chase you, I won't beg you, I won't stay in a situation where I'm constantly guessing where I stand, what they hear internally is, I can't hide in this dynamic anymore. And that is terrifying for someone who has relied on emotional hiding places their entire life. Your self-respect removes their usual cover stories because they can't convincingly tell themselves you're clingy when you're actually stepping back. They can't say you're irrational when you're calmly stating what you need. They can't base the narrative on you being weak when you keep proving you can walk away. So the only move left for their ego is to twist your strength into an accusation, as if the problem is that you hold standards at all, instead of the fact that they don't know how to meet them. What you must remember is that their reaction to your strength says far more about how they feel about themselves than it does about you. They are not panicking because you are wrong. They are panicking because your presence makes it harder to avoid the truth of their own limitations. And sometimes, to escape that discomfort, they'll gravitate toward people with fewer boundaries, less clarity, more willingness to tolerate inconsistency, not because those people are better matches, but because being with them doesn't make their lack of growth so obvious with you. They feel called up higher, and they don't know how to answer that call. Without you, they can keep telling themselves the story that they are fine as they are and everyone else is just too much. Your strength is not the reason the connection broke. It is the reason it could no longer continue in its unhealthy form. Your self-respect is what finally put friction on a pattern that would have otherwise gone on indefinitely. Your ability to say no to chaos is what protected you from getting even more lost in someone else's unfinished work. So when an avoidant person panics at your strength, see it for what it is, a sign that your boundaries are working, that your standards are real, that your presence brings truth into the space, And while they may interpret that truth as pressure, it is also an invitation they can either grow into or walk away from, but it is not a verdict against you. The very qualities they label as too strong are the ones that will shield you from staying in places where you must keep shrinking to make someone who hasn't grown yet feel comfortable. Your combination of backbone and heart triggers both their deepest attraction and their deepest fear of losing control, because on one level you are everything they secretly crave, and on another level you are everything their nervous system is terrified to surrender to. You are not just kind, you are strong. You are not just understanding, you have standards. You are not just loving, you have limits, and that blend is rare for them. They are used to one of two extremes, either people who let them lead, over, give, and accept crumbs while calling it love, or people who are strong but closed, self-protective to the point that there is no real emotional invitation. But you brought both. You brought warmth and depth and empathy, while also showing that you could walk if something repeatedly disrespected you. And that is exactly why they couldn't look away, because your heart made them feel seen and soothed, but your backbone made them feel challenged and exposed. At first, this feels intoxicating for them. Your heart pulls out their softer side, the part that wants to lean on someone, to be understood, to share their weight. They feel a sense of relief that they don't have to perform so much around you, that you can read between the lines, anticipate their moods, hold space for their fears, and that makes them deeply attracted, because avoidants might claim they want space, but what they crave underneath is someone who can hold their complexity without collapsing. And you showed that you could, but then your backbone comes into play, the part of you that says, I won't be treated as an afterthought. The part that says, if you disappear, there are consequences. The part that says, I love you, but I won't sacrifice my entire self to keep you comfortable. And that is when their fear of losing control gets triggered. Because for an avoidant, control is safety, controlling the pace, the distance. The depth is how they make sure they never feel too dependent, too vulnerable, too at risk of being hurt. So when they meet someone they can't emotionally overpower, someone who doesn't crumble when they pull away, someone who can say no and actually mean it, it shakes the foundation of the strategies they've used their whole life. Your backbone means they can't dictate the entire emotional climate anymore. They can't get away with ghosting and returning, like nothing happened without you eventually naming it. They can't use, that's just how I am, as a permanent shield because you call it out, you ask for more. You challenge them to meet you in the middle, and a part of them is drawn to that, because it hints at a different kind of relationship. One where they could finally be held accountable and grow, but another part of them panics, because that kind of relationship also means they can't hide, they can't control everything, they can't have all the advantages of love with none of the vulnerability. Your heart says, I'm here with you. Your backbone says, but only if you're here with me too. And that is where their attraction and fear collide, so you end up feeling the push-pull. They move toward you when their longing is louder. They move away when their fear of losing control takes over. They feel safe in your empathy and threatened by your strength at the same time. They might even try to subtly soften your backbone, making comments about you being too intense, too serious, too independent, because if they can get you to doubt your strength, they get to stay in charge. They don't have to stretch. They don't have to step up. They can keep you in their life without ever fully meeting you there. But whenever you stand back up after being disappointed, whenever you recenter in your standards, whenever you pull your energy back instead of chasing, their attraction spikes again. because at a deeper level they recognize that this is the kind of partner who could actually hold a real relationship with them if they were brave enough to join you in it. Your backbone and heart together create a kind of emotional gravity they can't fully escape. They may try to distance themselves, distract, date others, convince themselves you're too much. But they keep circling back mentally because there's a part of them that knows they will not easily find that same combination again. Someone who can forgive but also say, "Enough." Who can love but also let go, who can listen deeply but also call them out. And that is why they panic. Because if they surrender to that kind of love, they know their old way of protecting themselves has to die. You become the crossroads between their old life and a new emotional reality. And standing at that crossroads is terrifying when your identity has been built on staying in control at all costs. They may panic and test you, pull away, or try to shrink you, not because you're wrong, but because your strength makes their defenses feel small. And this is one of the most confusing experiences you can have with an avoidant person. Because on the surface it looks like your power is the problem, your clarity is the problem, your standards are the problem, when in reality it's their internal walls rattling in the presence of someone who won't collapse to make them comfortable. When an avoidant feels that they are starting to care about you, and also realizes you are not someone they can easily control, their nervous system goes into quiet alarm. They start worrying, often unconsciously, that if they let this continue, they'll have to step up in ways they've never practiced before, be more emotionally available, communicate when they feel like hiding, take responsibility instead of running, and that level of growth feels threatening, so they reach for the oldest tools they know: distance, testing, and subtle attempts to make you doubt yourself. The testing can look like suddenly becoming less responsive, just when things are going well, not because their interest dropped, but because they want to see if you will chase them harder and prove you're more invested than they are. It can look like poking at your insecurities, joking about your standards being too high, accusing you of overreacting when you express very normal needs. They are not simply trying to be cruel, they are trying to restore a familiar power balance, where they feel like the one with less to lose, the one being pursued, the one who gets to decide how close or far things go without being truly challenged. When that doesn't work, or when your strength continues to show, the panic often deepens and turns into pullback. They might take longer to reply, stop making plans, become vague about the future, or lean into a chill persona that keeps everything light and undefined. And because you are emotionally attuned, you feel the shift immediately and start questioning yourself. You scan for what you did wrong. Maybe you think you were too honest, too vulnerable, too direct. When in reality what often happened is this: your authenticity put pressure on their defenses, and instead of letting those defenses soften, they chose to retreat behind them again. The attempts to shrink you can be incredibly subtle, remarks that make you feel like you need to tone yourself down, jokes about you always needing to talk, comments that frame your boundaries as drama, even calling your independence intimidating, in a way that sounds flattering but is really a message: please be a little smaller so I don't have to feel my own inadequacy so intensely next to you. And if you aren't aware, you can start cooperating with that message, shaving off pieces of yourself, being less honest, asking for less, trying to appear more easygoing than you actually are, just to stop triggering their panic. But every time you do that, you pay with your self-respect. The key is understanding that their reaction is about the size of their defenses, not the wrongness of your strength. Your ability to say, "This doesn't work for me," doesn't make you unlovable. It just makes you incompatible with people who want the benefits of love, without the work of showing up. Your willingness to walk away from disrespect doesn't make you harsh. It makes you unavailable for dynamics that keep you emotionally starving. Your clarity about what you want doesn't make you demanding. It makes you honest, and honesty exposes where others are still hiding from themselves. When an avoidant is faced with someone like you, they are brought to a crossroads, either rise and grow or try to pull you down to the level where their defenses feel comfortable again. Tests distance, and attempts to shrink you are their way of avoiding that growth. They hope you will prove their old story right. That everyone eventually bends for them, that real strength will soften to fit their fear, that you will choose them over your own peace. But every time you stay rooted in your truth, you quietly show them another possibility, that love doesn't have to mean losing yourself. That intimacy doesn't have to mean surrendering all control. That two adults can both hold power in a relationship without one needing to dominate the emotional space. Whether they step into that possibility is not your job. Your job is to keep your backbone and your heart together, to refuse to shrink just to calm someone else's panic, and to remember that the right person, even if they feel intimidated at first, will eventually see your strength not as a threat to their defenses, but as an invitation to finally lay those defenses down. Their fear of your strength is really fear of being fully seen, accountable, and unable to hide behind, "That's just how I am." Because your strength doesn't just stand beside them, it shines a light on them. And that light makes all the shortcuts, avoidance, and emotional laziness impossible to disguise as personality, preference, or attachment style. When you come into their life with a solid sense of self, a clear understanding of your needs, and the willingness to express them, you are not behaving in a way that is extreme, you are behaving in a way that is emotionally adult. But to someone who has survived relationships by staying half available and using distance as protection, that level of clarity feels like exposure. It strips away all the safe places they used to hide. The "I'm just bad at texting. I don't like labels. I'm not emotional. I'm just private" lines that used to work on other people suddenly sound thin and hollow next to you. Because you don't attack them, you simply don't accept those lines as permanent limitations. You respond with things like, "I understand that's your pattern, but I still need communication. I hear you don't like labels, but I still need clarity. I get that you shut down when overwhelmed, but disappearing is not okay." And in that moment, they are no longer debating preference. They are standing in front of their own lack of emotional development. Your strength demands something they have spent a long time avoiding: growth. It asks them to look at why they hide, why they stonewall, why they deflect, why they dismiss feelings as drama. And that's terrifying, because once they see it clearly, they can't unsee it. And if they don't change, they can no longer pretend they don't know why their relationships keep collapsing. They lose the ability to say, "This is just who I am," without also hearing the truth beneath it. "This is who I've chosen to stay as." So instead of leaning into your strength as an invitation to evolve, they often experience it as pressure and judgment, even when you are speaking softly, even when you are being patient. Your very presence communicates, "I'm willing to do the work if you are." And they feel that as a demand: be different, show up, see yourself, and that is exactly what they've built their defenses to escape. Being fully seen means their survival strategies don't work anymore. You notice the way they joke when they feel vulnerable, the way they disappear when conversations get deep, the way they flip blame when they feel guilty, and you gently call it out, not to attack them, but because you want something honest between you, and instead of experiencing that as love, their nervous system experiences it as danger. You are getting too close to the raw places they have kept hidden even from themselves. Places of shame, fear, abandonment, and if they let you keep seeing them at that depth, they fear you will either leave when you realize how broken they are or require more of them than they believe they can give. So they rush back to the safety of their old identity, the one where they are just independent, not that emotional, not relationship material, because that story has protected them from having to try and possibly fail. Accountability is equally threatening, because accountability means allowing their choices to matter. It means they cannot ghost and pretend it was nothing. They cannot lash out and later act like it did not count. They cannot keep saying, "This is who I am," as if that absolves them from the impact it has on you. Your strength refuses to absorb that impact quietly. You say, "This hurt, this confused me, this isn't okay for me." And suddenly they are in unfamiliar territory where their behavior is not invisible, it is reflected back. And the only way to stay close to you is to step into ownership. Something like, "You're right, I shut down, I avoided, I hurt you. And I need to do better." For someone whose entire coping system is built on avoiding emotional exposure, that level of accountability feels like standing unarmored in the middle of a battlefield, so they try to retreat into titles and labels. "I'm avoidant, I'm just like this," as if naming the pattern should excuse repeating it, but your strength quietly insists that naming a wound is not the same as healing it. So when they say, explicitly or implicitly, that you are too strong, what they're really saying is, "You see me too clearly. You make it harder for me to hide behind my usual excuses. You require a version of me I'm not sure I can be yet, and that terrifies me." They don't fear your strength because it's wrong. They fear it because it means they either have to rise into a more honest, responsible, emotionally present self, or accept that they are choosing not to. And once that choice is conscious, it's much harder to live with, especially while looking into the eyes of someone who has shown them what real, mutual love could be. Every time you refuse to shrink, you are quietly forcing them into a decision they've been avoiding their whole life. Either rise to meet you where you actually are, or retreat back into the easier, shallower dynamics that don't ask much of them. And that is exactly why your strength feels so disruptive to an avoidant person. Because up until you, they could live in a comfortable middle, staying half in and half out with people who tolerated their distance, explained away their inconsistency, and accepted almost any treatment as long as they didn't fully disappear. But you are different. You have a heart that feels deeply and a spine that refuses to pretend you're okay when you're hurting. And that combination creates a kind of emotional line in the sand they cannot step around. They either step up or step away. When you don't shrink, you don't water yourself down to become more manageable. You stop apologizing for wanting real communication. You stop pretending you're fine with crumbs. You stop laughing off the things that actually sting, and you stop adjusting your standards every time they feel uncomfortable. And in that moment, their usual escape hatches start to close. They can't just label you too sensitive. When you calmly say, "This doesn't work for me," they can't hide behind, "I'm just bad at texting." When you respond with, "I understand that, but consistency is a basic requirement for me," they can't lean on, "I don't do feelings." When you stand there and say, "I do, and I'm not going to live in a relationship where emotions are treated like a problem," by refusing to shrink, you make their choices visible. They are no longer invisible habits. They are active decisions to either meet you or lose you. That's the pressure they feel, not because you're controlling, but because your self-respect introduces consequence. If they rise to meet you, it means they have to step into discomfort. They have to start communicating when they'd rather shut down. They have to admit when they're scared instead of pretending they're bored. They have to take responsibility for the impact of their withdrawal and not just the intention behind it. They have to learn skills they never learned growing up, like apologizing without making you wrong for hurting, staying in the room when things are emotionally intense, sharing their inner world even when it feels unsafe. And that growth is not small. It asks them to outgrow the identity they've clung to, the one that says, "I'm just independent. I don't need anyone. I'm not built for deep relationships," because your presence exposes that story as a shield, not a truth. And stepping beyond it feels like walking without armor. So rising to meet you is not just about trying a bit harder. It's about being willing to be a different person than the one they've always been in love. And as much as a part of them wants that, another part is terrified of what it will cost. If they don't rise, your refusal to shrink pushes them toward their other option, retreating into easier, shallower dynamics where not much is required, and therefore not much is risked. They might move toward people who don't ask questions, who accept vague answers, who don't need emotional depth, who find their distance mysterious rather than painful, and that can look, from the outside, like they've chosen someone better than you, someone more compatible, more chill, but often what they've really chosen is comfort over growth, familiarity over healing, and you must not take that as a reflection of your value. It is a reflection of where they are willing to stay stuck. Those dynamics feel safer to them because they never have to face the mirror you held up, the mirror that showed them where they shut down, where they disappear, where they fear being fully seen. With easier partners, they can keep telling themselves they're fine, that the problem was always with the intense ones like you. But deep down, a part of them knows the truth. The relationships where they are not required to stretch are the ones where they never get to be fully known either. So every time you refuse to shrink, you're not just defending yourself in that moment, you're forcing a larger choice in their life. Can they meet someone like you in the deep end? Or will they keep swimming in the shallow with people who never ask them to go under the surface? And whichever they choose, you win. Because if they rise into the kind of partner you actually deserve. And if they retreat, they remove themselves from a position in your life that demanded you constantly squeeze yourself smaller to make room for their fear. Your job is not to drag them toward growth. Your job is to stand in your full height, your full heart, and let their response tell you everything you need to know, because your refusal to shrink doesn't push real love away. It protects you from spending your life begging available people to meet you in places they are not yet brave enough to stand.